Welcome to another episode of Special Needs Jungle in Conversation series with me, Renata Blower.
And me, Tanya Tiroro. And today we've got the absolute pleasure of talking to somebody who probably doesn't need much introduction. Cary Grant is a BAFTA award-winning broadcaster who was awarded an MBE for services to music, media and charities. And she's also the mother of 4 children with additional needs. Cary's been very open about her family's struggles to access services and the discrimination and the marginalisation her children have faced along the way.
As you know, we've been campaigning for a long time for the Department for Education to acknowledge and address the impact that intersectionality has on all aspects of SEND. So when we found out that Cary's latest book was tackling the subject head on by discussing her family's experiences, we thought it would be a really great opportunity for us to hear what the human cost is of getting it wrong. So, Cary, before we get on to what prompted you to write A Very Modern Family, can you tell us a little bit about your family and their experiences growing up disabled?
Oh my gosh, yeah, their experiences. Well, how many podcasts do we have? So I've got these 4 incredible children. 3 are birth children, 1 was adopted, and they've all got additional needs, as Tanya said. And those are, so 2 are autistic. When I say 2 are at least 2, maybe 3. You know, you've always got that thing, maybe there's another one around the corner that I've just missed. So obviously with your first child, you have nothing to go by if you haven't really, I'd never been around children, I'd never held a baby before I had my first child. So, you know, the first one you're kind of almost experimenting with, like, oh, there's something different. They go to school, they're like so happy at home. They go to school and it's like, hang on, what happened here? Why is this suddenly not working? And so, like happens for many Black and mixed race children, in school, there's a high proportion of those children, when something's not quite working for them at school, they get sent down a social, emotional, mental health, the SEMH pathway, rather than what's the word?
Disability.
Diagnostic or diagnostic.
Yeah, SEND. Yeah. Oh my gosh, how can I forget that? I was like, hang on, I forgot. There's just so many acronyms. I've lost my acronym. So rather than an SEND pathway, so rather than looking at as actually this is a brain condition, this must be environment. This must be something that, because the parents aren't doing so well and they're not very good. Those judgments are made of our Black and mixed race children. So I think that had Olive been a blonde white girl, they probably would have been sent down the right pathway, but it took till they were 18 to get a diagnosis of ADHD. And I think in all of that, so I spend that time really just talking about Olive, because I think for many parents, you feel like I got it so wrong with my first child. Why did I not see these things? And I think that's how many of us feel. And that no one thanks you for a late diagnosis, do they? You know, and 18, as far as I'm concerned, that's late. You know, many of us are getting diagnosed in our 40s and 50s, but
46.
18, yeah, 57. So I think that there are, you know, for our young people at the age of 18, you've gone through all those years not knowing why you fit, why you don't fit, not knowing why you get bullied, not knowing why teachers bully you actually. And that's some of the worst bullying, unfortunately. I love teachers, you're brilliant, but actually some are not so great with our SEND students. And so that was my first. And then the next 2 came along and were diagnosed with as being autistic on the same day back in 2009. And David and I were like, wow, how incredible. That's amazing. We didn't see it as a negative thing. Obviously the children were the same the day before they were assessed as the day after. So we're still living with the same children. They just now have an explanation for why they struggle with certain things.
And hopefully more understanding from everybody else.
Yeah, like, you know, and that's where we really began to kind of dig deep and go, right, okay, we have a neurodivergent family, clearly now we see that. And so and then Nathan.
Can I just ask, how old were they when they were diagnosed? Did they get an earlier diagnosis?
That's a really good question. So Arlo was 3.
Okay.
And Tylen was 7. So what happened was Arlo was more obviously autistic. There was more obviously things going on. And I had the most amazing health visitor who said, you know, your child might be autistic. And I was like, oh, what's that? you know, went away and looked it up and just thought, yeah, they're ticking a lot of boxes. But at the same time, I was like, hang on a minute, not only is Arlo ticking boxes, Thailand is ticking a lot of these same boxes. So Arlo went through the NHS system, and then we did a private assessment. I feel really ashamed of that. I feel ashamed that at that time I had the money to do that, because other families don't have that. But you know, that was available to us, so that's what we did back in 2009. So on the same day, we you know, David and I sat in a field in Chorleywood and just went, wow, okay, we're raising a different family. This is a different
Neurospicy family.
Yeah, that's a great word, neurospicy.
And
That's what we call our family. It's neurospicy. So
I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of. I think any parent would do the same. If you have, you know, a spare 400-500 quid to go and see a private, I did the same.
It's more indicative of the system, isn't it? That's because the waiting lists are ridiculous at the moment. So yeah, there's absolutely, Tanya's right, there's no shame at all. It's you doing the absolute best you can for your children, as a parent would.
And then our son came to us at the age of 2, and comes with a whole suite of needs. And so, you know, we were, I think to begin with, we were kind of just like jollying along, trying to work out how to make school work for these kids. And then there just came a point where it seemed like every child hit a crisis. And I think that's what happens for many children, particularly our autistic children, is that, and particularly those assigned female at birth, they can maybe limp through if they're in mainstream school, if they're what I call neurotypical passing, what used to be called high functioning, and I hate that word because my children are definitely not high functioning on certain days. So neurotypical passing, they limp through some of those early primary school years. You're in the school and you're going, well, can you do this? Can you do that? But they're sort of kind of what I would call minor adjustments. By the time they get to year 5 and 6 and they're about to transition into secondary school, that's when you start sort of hearing about, you know, the mental health challenges. And that's where each of my children really crashed at roughly around the same times as well. It just seemed like, my gosh, it's all kicking off all at the same time. So I think, yeah, that's who we are in a nutshell. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you more of the stories, but that's, you know, that crashing, I think that's what created what I would call a warrior parent. I don't think warrior parents are born warrior parents. You're made in the furnace of affliction. You are born in that place where things are so against you, and the fact is that your biggest challenges aren't even your kids. I wish it was. I wish that my biggest challenge was home. The biggest challenge is the system. That's the stuff that gets you. That's the stuff that's got you at 4 o'clock in the morning, laying awake going, I can't do this. How do I get my child help? My child is going to die, literally going to die if I do not access help. How do I do this? So it's the systems that get to you. In my point, that's my point of view.
Do you think that because Olive got such a late diagnosis, and obviously she was categorized as social, emotional, mental health, rather than actually having, you know, neurodivergence, do you think that, I mean, with SEMH, it places the emphasis of the behaviour firmly on the child or the parents or both, that it's their fault that needs to be corrected out of them so they can then behave appropriately? Do you think that's had a lasting impact, that kind of like almost like placing the emphasis on it being Olive's sort of like it's her that has to change rather than the environment that needs to rise to meet her needs?
Their pronouns are they, them, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, absolutely. No, that's fine. It's always, this is why these conversations are good. So we just go, by the way, they're they, them. So for them, I think, yes, I think it was really difficult, because I think initially I was quite a strict parent. I think back in the day, I was like, I want all my kids sitting in the restaurant, all behaving, and everyone's going to look at us and go, what a great family. And of course, that wasn't to be. Mine are all under the table, out the door, trying to access the kitchen. And so I think that for Olive, it was difficult because they were actually a really compliant child. They were the child, you know, I used to back in the day do the naughty step, and I would find Olive on the stairs and I'd be like, what are you doing here? And Olive would go, I stole a sweet from the jar, you know. I'd be like, get off the chair, you know. So I think it was difficult for Olive, but I think actually in some ways the blame part, I think Olive kind of rode that out. I think it was harder actually for us as parents in terms of the blame stuff, because it puts the emphasis back on you. And my thing was to agree with the school. I was like, this child's not behaving. I need to go home and tell my Olive what they should be doing. And when I look back on that now, I just think, what was I thinking? You know, even with Tyler, my second child, by the time they were refusing school, I was having to choose. I didn't realize this at the time, but I was having to choose between my child's mental health and the attendance officer. And I was more scared of the attendance officer. So I'd be like, you need to get in that school, get down these stairs now, you know. And I think how I was for probably a whole year, almost dragging Ty into school before I realized, hang on a minute, this school are doing nothing for my child. No wonder why they don't want to go to school. And it's that flip that you make. I mean, maybe some parents, hopefully parents get it a bit quicker than I did, but just you realize, hang on a minute, this is not my child. This is actually the school that are not doing what my child needs for my child to engage and feel safe. Actually, the basic levels of feeling safe. And so
I constantly felt like a failing parent, still feel like a failing parent now.
Yeah, and I really hear that, and that makes me really cross. And this is an area that, you know, I mean, I'm doing an MA at the moment, and one of my essays was on child-on-parent violence, because that's a whole other area. You know, in normal regular birth families, it's 7% parents experience child-on-parent violence. In adoptive families, it's at 63%. So if we've got those kind of stats, we know that why are we not doing anything when people go to adopt? So I'm really vocal about this, that there's nothing worse than sitting with a black eye with a social worker that says to you, what did you say that caused that? What did you do that caused that? You know, if this was in a marriage violence, if David had hit me, then no one would ever say, did you not cook his dinner properly? No one would ever be saying that kind of rhetoric, which we used to get back in the day. But when it's a child, it must be the parent that's responsible. And that is wholly unfair.
And then also you have the whole safeguarding that can kick in and end up devastating families, because then they blame the parents for not keeping the other children safe. And then all of a sudden you're facing every parent's biggest nightmare.
And you had that despite the celebrity that you would think would have protected you to some extent.
Well, it's an issue. Yes, I'm glad you bring that up, because I think sometimes people do think, well, it must be easier for you because people know who you are. I think in some ways it does, but I think in many ways it acts against us. I think there's very much if you think about how many times people have looked at you or said stuff to you that is like, who do you think you are, coming in my school and telling me how to teach your child? If you think you have that, I have that times 10. It's like, who do you think, just because you're off the telly, you think you can come in here and tell us how to be? But the point is this, right? Parents don't remain the same kind of parents. Once you know your child has got something going on, you shapeshift, you change, you explore, you learn. I mean, David and I went to every single lecture, we read books, we went on courses, we did 3 years of trauma therapy and nonviolent resistance training. We then adapted that for autistic people. We then taught that training to other people. You know, you're talking about parents who are seriously expert and know their stuff. I'm not ashamed of that. Of course, I'm an expert parent. I've got 4 kids who need expertise. So don't treat us like we don't know anything and like we don't know how to parent our children. Of course, we know how to parent our children. We've learned.
We're trying to somehow strong arm our children into these wonderful specialist placements that we desperately want. We got golden tickets and all the rhetoric that the government uses.
If only there were, like, you know, if only there were enough places for these children, then perhaps, you know, we wouldn't all be trying to get that one place that's available for 50 children that's about 2 hours away from where you live. You know, we all know that's the reality of it. We all know that the reality of it is, you know, I have literally come off a bed of suicide watch with a child, gone and done the one show and come back to the hospital in the evening, and David's, you know, round the clock. So yes, it may look like my life is still glamorous and all of that stuff, but I'm still having to live as pretty much as a full-time carer with children out of school, not accessing CAMHS, not accessing any proper care. I say that sometimes they have, and sometimes it's been very good, the care that we have got, but too often it's too little, too late. And this is, you know, the sort of the damage that's done in the waiting for our children by the time they actually access any help is crazy. So yes, we do get blamed as parents, because that's probably the easiest, you know, ultimately it's probably the system.
Something that I don't think is often talked about is the mental health toll that's taken on parents. And there are lots of parents that have PTSD as a result, but they don't seek help because there's shame attached.
And the relationship toll as well.
Yeah, and relationship toll. Do you think that's affected you, or do you think it's made David stronger?
I think that David and we talk about this in the book, actually. I think David would say that he was later to the party than I was. But I think once I knew, hang on, we're parenting different children here, we need to learn how to do the different thing. I think I jumped in with both feet and was like, okay, we need to do that. I think David was a little bit more affected by the voices that are out there that kind of make you double down into, no, we just have to be very definite about how we're going to do this and have to parent the way that neurotypical people parent. And so David and I, for maybe 2 years, were really on different pages, and it would come out in different ways where I would want to do things a particular way, and David would be like, no, that child needs a boundary. I'd be like, you put in a boundary now, you're going to lose the trust of that child, your choice. And so those conversations were happening all the time. But I do think that David and I do have the advantage. David and I have been together for 37 years. So there's a foundation. We're not going anywhere. So we just know that we've got to work this stuff out. And like every other person that's in a relationship, you have to work it out, don't you? We're no different. So, and sometimes, you know, even now there are days where we disagree on how to do something, but David and I have never ever shied away from a robust conversation. So, you know, we'll have those chats. So I think in terms of our relationship, it's been fine. I think in terms of mental health, I think you're never going to be the same if you've had a child on suicide watch. You're never going to be. You are affected by that, and you might evolve and be born into something that's more incredible, but that experience is going to change you. I think ultimately
it gives you a terror within yourself that never quite, I mean, I've been there, and it just gives you this terror that never really leaves you.
Yeah,
because you just think it could happen again, and what if I'm not there, and what if I'm not, you know,
it means that little bubble that most parents can live in, thinking nothing bad is ever going to happen. That's what gets popped.
There are no guarantees. And, you know, I think about parents that are parenting in a neurotypical way, they never have to think about this stuff. And so everything in you changes. You're not going to, part of you, of course, you want your kids to get the GCSEs, go out and get a job and have friends and blah, blah, blah. But when you're, you know, with Ty for 3 years, was on and off suicide watch from 13 to 16. And I think in those years, you know, I just wanted oxygen going in and carbon dioxide coming out. And that was my only expectation for that child. Literally no other expectation. You know, Arlo is different. Arlo goes out the house and then will call me and go, and we live in London. They'll say, I'm just in Norwich. How do you think I'll get home? And you go, what do you mean you're in Norwich? You know, so there's, you know, that brings a whole other stress, which is not to do with them ending their life, but is to do with where my child's a lost person now. You know, my gosh, the stress of not knowing where they are or who they're with, and yet you want your child to have a social life, you want your child to have friends, but the vulnerabilities are there. And so it's different things with each child. And then the violence of my younger one, you know, again, a different thing entirely. So each has their...
Do you not sit back and go, I really remember teaching this to my child, but clearly I didn't do it properly, or I didn't, you know, do the right thing, because that now, you know, they can get somewhere like Norwich, but they can't get back again. What did I do wrong?
Yeah, I tell you what I do, and I did this from about 10 years ago. On a regular basis, I look in the mirror and I tell myself, hello, you're Carrie. I'm not Tylen, I'm not Arlo, I'm not Nathan, I'm not Olive, I'm Carrie, and I have my own personhood, and I think what happens is, in a desperate need to empathize and try and get inside the head of our children, sometimes we literally climb in their skin. You know, it's like we've embodied them, and in that space we're trying to work out how am I feeling, what am I doing, how do I react to this child. We must remember to get back out again, and this is me, this is who I am, and actually I'm a good soul, I'm a good person, I'm a nice person, I'm valued, I'm cherished, and I'm lovely. And no matter what people say, no matter what social services say, no matter how much people come against me, I know that about myself. I know that in my heart I want to be a good parent. So yeah, sure, I don't always get it right, but I know that my true north is to be that parent. So I don't entertain thoughts of not being good enough. I can't. I think I would literally, I don't think I'd be here if I had to just go, you're not good enough for this job, you're not up to this job. I think we have to be, for me it's a discipline. It's like I just cannot listen to those voices that tell me I'm not good enough, because I won't survive a day not in this environment. It's just too difficult. But I think that is, you know, you're amazing.
Voices off as well. Voices off that tell you at the beginning, why are you trying to label your child? Why are you trying to medicalize your child? They don't seem autistic to me. You know, why don't you? Have you thought about, you know, all that kind of...
Oh my gosh, yeah. We've all been to CAMHS for the first time and been given the book Listening to Your Child.
Or parenting skills 101. It's like we're parenting at extreme level here. We don't need the basics.
I recently heard that there was a department called FCAMHS. I didn't know that FCAMHS, forensic CAMHS. FCAMHS. I was like, yeah, I've always called it FCAMHS. So we love you, CAMHS. You do some really good work as well.
What was the catalyst for you writing this book and being... I know you are open, and you've now put it down on paper. What made you and David go, let's do this?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think for David and I, our job is vocal coaching, right? So we teach people how to sing, but more than that, we've always been way more than that. We are about, who are you? What are you about? Where's your voice? How does your voice fit with who you are? So, and alongside our vocal coaching, we do leadership coaching and other things. So there's always been this thing of, how do you find your voice, your identity, the essence of you? And so those things have kind of run along. And I think at this point in our lives, we realize that it's about raising our voices as a community and as people who are hidden. You know, I think that being pretty much a full-time carer is a really hidden space that everyone, if you do get any attention, it will be for your child. But for parents, they just are completely hidden and voiceless. And we felt that actually we do have a voice. We've been given, you know, even if it's the tiniest amount of fame, that little bit of fame that we have is a currency that can be used. And so how do you want to use it? You know, you've only got one life. You can use it for yourself, and you can go and, you know, go on holiday to the south of France and lay on a beach, or you can spend your time thinking about, how do I serve my community? So 10 years ago, we started a support group And that's been running all the way through lockdown, online and stuff. And then, you know, what else can we do to raise the voices of people like us and like our children? So I think we are in that privileged space of being able to do that. So that's why we wanted to write the book. I do also feel like, and I don't know whether you relate to this, but you're raising your children, you're trying to prepare them for the world, and it's a world that doesn't accept them. So at the same time as preparing them for the world, you're trying to prepare the world for them. You're trying to change, can we just change the world a bit so that my child fits? So I suppose writing a book is speaking into that space. It's like, what would happen if we weren't so polarized? What would happen in this space that we live in post-COVID, which is so frightening, quite frankly? How do we make it more accepting? Like, I believe in the goodness of people. I believe there are good people out there, but I believe that if we start taking the mickey out of people because they're in a marginalized group, then it's easy for everyone else to just jump on board, you know. And I saw this during Black Lives Matter during the pandemic, that, you know, all you would get is one person saying, why can't West Indian people just be grateful? Or why can't Black people be grateful? You'd be like, what on earth are you talking about? Why are you saying it like that? But underneath, you then read the comments and you'd go, oh my gosh, they've just kicked off a load of other people who probably, I don't know, maybe they did inside feel like this, but maybe they didn't. Maybe you've just given them a voice that's in the wrong direction. And I guess we want to redress that balance and go, how do we get to the bridge bit where we join up? I don't want to be polarized and put in another category and put out here on the outside. I want our outside to be on the inside. I want us to, how do we coexist together in a way that works without being cruel? And so this book is really about that. It's about all those intersections that are in my family. It's about my children, or being in a Black family, mixed race family. It's about the neurodivergencies that exist. It's about adoption and birth children. It's about gender and sexuality. So all of those areas are represented in my family. And so we're just saying, okay, here's a very modern family. This is us. We didn't make these things. This is just our family. So this is how we're dealing with it. Because actually, our family is amazing. And our family in lockdown thrived. We were like, yeah, when it's just us, we're like our own little village. Without all the judgment of the world, it was great. So how do we ask the world, hey, knock, knock, could we come in, please? You know, but for much of the world, you know, if they've got that privilege, just asking for the space can feel like oppression. So that's why you get the kickback. That's why you get the knockback.
Can you, just for our listeners that don't understand what intersectionality means, would you just explain what it means to you?
Yeah. So Kimberly Crenshaw is a writer that first coined this phrase, intersectionality. She's a Black woman, Black American woman, and she was saying that it's like standing in the middle of an intersection in a crossroads. You know, if I don't get knocked down one way for being Black, I get knocked down the other way for being a woman. And so that was maybe 30 years ago now. But over the years, what people have done is added, there's this other intersection that's coming into that, and another intersection. And so what we have is children who might be or are mixed race, autistic, trans, and maybe other divergences too, and looking at how the world responds to all of those areas. And so I might go to into a situation for one of my children in advance. Say they're meeting a new group of people they've got to work with, and I go in and I go, right, well, my child's autistic, so can I just go through a few, you know, these are the top 5 things that you might want to look at, that will be really helpful. And then I have to say, oh, by the way, my child is trans, so their pronouns are he, him. And then you quite often what happens is you lose all of the autism stuff, because they're then just focusing on, okay, we've got a non-binary person here, and we've got a trans person here, so I've just got to get the pronouns right. And I don't really get why I have to do the pronouns. So that's kind of irritating me slightly. That's how people often think, unfortunately. or they'll just make it all about them. And this is so difficult for me to have to use they, them pronouns. So you have all of this stuff going on and you just think, hang on a minute, my child's also autistic. So you've got to try and get all of that. So it's a lot to ask for. And then, you know, there might also be the fact that my child is acting in a scene and they've gone into makeup and there's no one that knows about Afro hair. And then I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling like a real moany person, because I'm like, oh, by the way, not only do you have to think about a quiet space and to get the pronouns, you've now got to have the right hair products and know how to cane row, you know. So it's,
well, I think that would be kind of a very basic thing, wouldn't you? I mean,
well, all of these things, quite frankly,
industry, but yeah,
but it's not basic. Unfortunately, it's not basic in our industry.
Yeah, that's often,
and our industry is getting better. In fact, in many ways, I think our industry is ahead of the game. I think the arts are super aware of trying to get it right. They began that journey in front of camera. So you saw a little bit of diversity happening on screen, but we've still got a long way to go, to get crews and the people behind the scenes, but also to get the directors and the producers and the writers from those marginalized communities. So yeah, we've still got a long way to go with all of that.
I mean, we're both closely connected to transgender young people with SEND. And research shows that you're 6 times more likely to be trans to be autistic if you are trans. Get it the right way around.
Trans, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, 6 times more likely to be autistic if you are trans. And for us, the complexities of both of those, plus PDA, pathological demand avoidance, plus chronic illness, has proved really challenging in moving forward into adulthood. And the current rhetoric, terrifying. How does your family navigate this?
Yeah. Well, I think the same as anybody else, it's really difficult. It's, I think in terms of navigating, I think the first thing is the family, actually. The family is has to be the safe space. The family has to be the space where you can show up as yourself and nobody is going to judge you for being who you are and showing up as yourself. I think once that environment is created and there's a safe space, it's how do we move out of that space into the world which doesn't necessarily understand, which is one thing. It's one thing not to understand, it's another thing to be anti. And I think those are very, very different things. I think there are many people who really want to understand, but just have no idea and no experience of difference. And I know when I first met David back in the 80s and we were dating, and white people would always work the conversation round. At some point, you just knew there would be a conversation about David, the color of David's skin. And this was people trying to process, okay, I'm in the presence of someone who's different to me, and how does that work? And I remember saying to David, doesn't this exhaust you, having to do this every day of your life? And he said, well, I'm used to it. But there is a part of me that thinks our marginalized communities shouldn't have to be exhausted every day of their lives explaining, giving a reason for their existence. You know, Google is free. Go and look it up. But I do think that going out into the world and having to explain yourself on multiple levels is a challenge. But I'm also really aware that there are people that really want to learn. And that's why I guess one of the reasons we wrote our book is like, just read this, because we're really honest. We're really honest about, you know, I was brought up in a family who were racist. So I had to work through my stuff. I had to think about, what do I think about this? Hang on a minute, that's not fair. And then I worked out my stuff to get to a point where I'm anti-racist. But that's my journey, and many people have to take that journey. Let's not be ashamed. Let's not deny that Britain wasn't racist back in the 60s and 70s. It was absolutely racist. And so, yes, to say that, oh no, I've never been racist, that's stupid. That's ignorant. We need to own it and change. And that's like, what's better than that? Let's change the way we think.
Don't you think, Carrie, though, that actually some of the problem is our generation were brought up to go, well, you're not racist if you say you don't see colour. So we should all be saying, don't see colour. and therefore I'm not racist.
Yeah.
But actually that's part of the problem. We need to be seeing colour.
Yes.
If we're not seeing colour, we are denying people's lived experiences. And I think the big
100%.
problem in SEND is that, you know, white families with white children feel like we all have a shared experience. And in reality, we don't. There are some things that are very similar, but to say it's the same for everyone, so having parent care forums with just white representative people there is denying the experience of other people who have other things influencing, like race, like, you know, their financial status, like where they live in the country. And actually we need to move away from this whole we're all living the same experience.
Yeah, we're not living the same.
Not.
We're really
and so
not.
Those conversations are not being had, and at the highest level. I mean, Tanya and I don't know how many meetings we've had now where we've talked to the Department for Education about intersectionality, saying that this is absolutely crucial. It should be, you know, teachers should understand it. It should be part of their core training, and every child they have, they should learn to look at them through an intersectional lens to properly understand, you know, that child's experiences. But I mean, we found that no matter how much we say it, and they nod and go, yeah, it doesn't make it into anything. I mean, look at the green paper, it literally not a mention. So how does that leave you and your family sort of feeling when your lived experiences are literally being whitewashed out of government policies and everything like that?
Because it's woke, isn't it? I think that's their agenda.
Well, yeah, and I think what happens is this word agenda comes in, and so people, just for being who they are accused of having an agenda. Like, why do you have an agenda? Because you're autistic. You just have an agenda to live, right, and to be treated fairly. I mean, that just doesn't seem like an agenda to me. If you're trans or non-binary, you don't have an agenda. You're showing up as yourself. You know, and why should you have to apologize for showing up as yourself? I think that's the hardest thing, is knowing that you go into a world that doesn't accept you, that doesn't like you, and doesn't want to have you around. And I think that's really, and people say, of course it's not like that. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. You only need to go on social media and see what people are saying. Just go onto Sam Smith's feed and see what they experience every single time they post something. So, you know, that's just one person. You know, I'm sure Susie Izzard, go onto her feed, and Eddie, who is also known as,
actually it was
Eddie Susie, and is comfortable because they are gender fluid, so she, he, Eddie Susie, it's all fine as far as she's concerned. And so, you know, and in a way, that's those people help our cause, because they are speaking openly about their experience, their lived experience. But we know that there's a cost to that. I dread to think what's in Susie Izzard's inbox or on the social media feed, because it will be cruel. And I've seen that with my children as well. When things have come out, things that people have said are just horrendous. And the bullying is awful. And then if you say that bullying, that's awful, then that's because you're woke. We can't even joke anymore. What are you going to do? Cancel us? It's that kind of, no, I just want it to be a kinder world for my kids. Is that okay?
Yeah, and it's other people's attitudes rather than is the problem, rather than your own family. So, I mean, what have you seen as the effects of professionals not understanding sort of intersectionality or transgender, and why is it so important that they do?
I think that even at the most basic levels, I've experienced just an incredible lack of knowledge. I think that's the main thing. It's not, there may be an anti thing, but I know when I've had to call the police on one occasion, and them saying, oh, this child is autistic, and then the police have said, or the call center said, are they being autistic at the moment? Yeah, like it's kind of, it's pretty consistent in my house. Yeah. And then coming and saying, oh yeah, they're upstairs, and then the police saying, oh, sorry, how many of them are there? I'm like, just the one. I did mention on the phone they're non-binary, so we've got, you know, those pronouns. And so I think and the other thing that happens is sometimes people will use the right pronouns with your child, but then when they're speaking about your child just to you privately, they then go back to the gender that they assume. And so
as if you are with them rather than with your child.
Yeah. And it's that kind of thing that I just find difficult, because I find it disrespectful. This is my child's identity. This is not up for debate.
You say police, is it the same in schools in your experience?
Well, actually, funnily enough, only one of my children that is trans non-binary is in school, because the others are older and out of school and they're at work. So there are challenges at work. You know, they have to go to work and be misgendered. My older two children, my Olive is non-binary and Ty is trans. And so they experience that every single day of their working life is being misgendered. Funnily enough, Arlo, who is a bit more gender fluid, so he, they are their pronouns. And when they go to school, the school is amazing and really on it. But I think it's a rare thing. It's a really rare thing.
What more do you think schools could do?
So I think
particularly when you've got a child who is trans and also is autistic or is neurodivergent. Yeah. That's a lot for them to get their heads around, particularly if they don't have anybody like that within their own families that they've personally experienced.
Yeah, I think denying someone their identity is probably horrible for any person. I mean, for anyone. But I think that if you're autistic as well, I think there is an added layer to how much that really feels personal and right into my personal space. I think there's that. But I think there are also really basic things about being trans non-binary that you can learn about. They're really easy, like just the misnomers, like, oh, this is a new thing with, you know, what is all this non-binary thing? It's a trendy new thing. Like, no, it's not actually. You know, the non-binary cultures have been around for thousands of years. So it's like literally it's on you could just put it into Wikipedia, like literally you can read a really simple reading, like it doesn't take 5 minutes to just get a real basic understanding of what non-binary is. And so understanding that, I think understanding pronouns, like the biggest cost is not to you, the biggest cost is to the child and to their identity. So it's not about us, it's not about me, whether I get it right or wrong. It's about actually, let me honor this child's identity. That's a really important part. And I would say, you know, looking at how it was for me with Olive, came out first as non-binary probably in 2019, and I was cooking in the kitchen, like just being busy mum, and I turned around and Olive had written in a notebook and turned the notebook towards me, and it said, I am non-binary, in really tiny writing on this page. And I, in my non-thinking, busy mum way, just went, oh, wonderful, darling, I'm so pleased for you. Anyway, let's talk about the dinner. And I completely missed the moment. And nothing happened for Olive, really, with me for a whole other year. We went into lockdown, and then Ty came out as non-binary. And suddenly I was like, oh, let me learn all about this. What are your pronouns? And of course, Olive was like, hang on a minute, I did this a year ago and you didn't even acknowledge me. So I've had to learn from the times that I've not got it right, and then put those situations right. So now I'm like championing my kids in that way, and championing non-binary people and trans people, because I realize that when you get it wrong, it does harm people. It's not good for their identities. It's not good for how they perceive themselves and their mental health. So yeah, just really basic stuff is really not hard to learn. And I think that's just learning some basics. I mean, again, in our book, we're like, please don't ask about whether you're going to have surgery. That's not the first question to ask someone when they say they're trans, you know, and that's often how people's first question. So you're going to have surgery then? Like, what? I didn't ask you about your sex life. Why are you asking me about my genitals? It's none of your business. So there are some do's and some don'ts that are really basic that we can do that make our trans non-binary communities feel more comfortable, and in doing so, obviously meeting the needs of our autism communities as well. As you say, 6 times more likely to be on the trans side.
Yeah, if we as parents can get used to your new pronouns of my child, shouldn't be that difficult for you, you know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And pronouns are really, I think for me, pronouns made more sense once I understood what the whole non-binary, the gender, what does it mean to have gender or to be genderless? I think that once I began to view the world through that lens, the pronouns just came more easily. I think when you just make it a rule, it's a lot harder to get right. But once you really understand the depth of knowledge, I think that helps, because Olive doesn't see gender in the way that they perceive the world. They acknowledge that people may think differently, and they respect that, but their view of the world is non-binary. So and that's I've looked through that lens. It's a really interesting lens. It's a very interesting way of looking at the world.
So why do you think that this is an issue that all SEND parents should care about, and how can our SEND community help to make the world a better place?
Such good questions. Well, I think we need to care about it if our children, if there's a high proportion of our autistic community that may identify in this way, it's important to know the very basics. And by the very basics, I mean, what are you going to say if your child says, I'm non-binary? David and I always have a phrase, which is fix your face, fix your face, because your child is going to read your face before words even come out your mouth. They are going to know what you think by what you've got written on your face. So you need to have thought ahead. That's a really important thing, and to work out all your own prejudices, get them out of yourself. That's what I've had to do, I get all that prejudice out, and so much prejudice is about just not knowing. It's ignorance.
Yeah, it's actually sitting down and recognising everybody has prejudice.
Yes, we do.
Own it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you a human. But if you refuse to recognise it, it'll never get better.
Exactly. And you're so right. And I think I guess making things easier for your child, our children have so much to teach the world, and therefore so do we, because we're parenting these incredible children. They're already out the box, and that is a very exciting place to live. It's very threatening because the neurotypical world is very boxed in by and large, and so to be outside of that puts you on the outside and makes you feel isolated and bullied and all those other things. But this is a very interesting space. When you're outside the box, it's a bit like the Matrix. When you're not conforming to that, wow, there's a whole world here that's really creative, that's really worth exploring. And for many people, they're like, do not put me outside the box. I need the box. The box is my security. I need to know that the world works in this way. And for people to say, actually, it does work in this way, but also the box is an ideology. Do you understand that? It's not just that that's a right way and this is a wrong way. You also have your own ideology. So boxed in people, there's their ideology. Fine, live and let live. But also, people are outside the box. There's different ideologies out there, and it's about actually embracing some of that. And some of that I have found to be really exciting, really exciting. I love living out. I live outside the box now, and I'm like, wow, I think I always did, but I acknowledge that now.
But I think what is underestimated is the bravery of young people, well, not just being autistic every day, being autistic in the world, but being trans and autistic, or somewhere else on that intersection. It takes bravery to go out there in this world at this point in time and be yourself.
To show up as yourself is, well, it can be life-threatening.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
See it.
We see it. We've seen it in our news, so we know that. The life-threatening, angle on it is really frightening, which is why we need to be doing more podcasts like this and writing more books and shouting out as loud as we can. To have an agenda, okay, I'll own having an agenda. It's my agenda that our children get to live. Yeah, that's my agenda. So yeah, living is an essential. Thriving would be another level, but just to stay alive, for our children to leave the house and not worry about being killed, that's a very real challenge.
We could talk about this literally all day. I mean, an hour has gone by virtually, and it's felt like 10 minutes. We do really hope that you will buy Carrie's book. Is it out in audio book as well when it?
Yes, I'm going to record the audio next week.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It has been such an interesting conversation. As Tanya said, we could go on and on and on. So maybe we'll have to book in another person.
You know what it's like for us parents? We could just go, let's talk about school. And then you can just spend, an hour on that. Social services, another hour. CAMS, another hour. Getting a job, another hour. Old age,
getting a job,
hour.
Yeah. There are so many different things that are not sufficiently thought about, and that are doubly difficult, trebly difficult if you are outside of that narrow band of normal as well. But again, thank you so much, Carrie, and we wish you every success with your book. We'll push it ourselves as much as we can as well. But do like and subscribe to this podcast, whichever platform you're listening or watching on. Thank you again, and thank you for watching this as well out there. Thanks.